Okay. Thank you guys for coming. How many people here are here from Amador Valley High School? All in the back. Isn't that nice? How many people here are here from Foothill High School?
Yeah!
Okay.
Literally the entire
class, but it's the middle. And so I'm going to guess that the Irvington people are going to be more around here. Is that right?
There's some other back further.
Okay, so how many people are here from Irvington?
Yeah.
Feel like you can
That
do
was
better.
lackadaisical.
Lackadaisical. That's right.
I give it a 4
right.
max.
Okay. So by show of hands, how many people have been to one of the 2 previous summer sessions? Almost everyone. How many people have not been to one of the 2 previous summer sessions? Okay. All right.
It's okay.
That's okay. Clearly you were busy earlier in the summer, didn't want to hang out. We're not taking it that personal, all right? So for those of you who don't know who we are, first of all, and for everybody else, we thank you guys for coming, taking time out. I know that I think for some of you school might have started already, for some of you school is about to start, but giving up a Saturday to come and learn about the Constitution is always a big deal, and so we appreciate your time. My name is Clinton Woods. I'm an attorney here in San Francisco. I'm also the president of the organization that puts on this. What are you guys laughing at? I'm also the president of this organization. We're called Californians Advancing Civic Education. Thank you. Or CACE. We've been doing this for 5 or so years. We like to think that it keeps getting better every year, but it's a thing that we enjoy. And really, what we are trying to do with these summer sessions is give all of you a head start on your We the People preparation, on getting you ready to compete at the state and hopefully the national level as well. I'm going to go around the room and let the people who are up here for CACE introduce themselves, and then we'll get started, starting with the most important person in the room.
Who hasn't shown up yet this summer.
Right.
Because you're so important.
Yeah. Hi, you guys. I'm Ashley. I work here at Farella. I'm a real estate attorney, so super exciting stuff. Haven't been able to make the other 2 summer sessions, but glad to be here today. I'm a member of the CACE board, or at least I will be as soon as I clear conflicts here. Anyway, really excited that so many of you showed up. Thank you so much for coming. And if you have any questions about the facilities or any of that, let me know. Otherwise, just enjoy yourselves.
All right, everybody give Ash a round of applause. But for Ash, we would not be able to be here, and that's excellent. For those of you who haven't heard really quickly about the restrooms, there is a single stall restroom right here, right outside the room. There's also men's and women's rooms. If you go through the elevator bank, men's room is on the right, women's room is on the left. Okay?
Hi, everybody. Beck, also on the board of CACE, but I don't have any conflicts. So.
Yeah,
been working with this for about 5 years now, and super excited to kick off a new year with you guys.
Where do you work, Beck?
Nowhere special. I work at Workday. Some of you from Pleasanton may have heard of it. They give me a hard time because I bring in swag.
Hi, good morning. I'm Sean Gentry. Hi, everyone in the back. Thanks for waving at me. Thanks for showing up, all the alumni back there who are waving. I'm an attorney. I practice civil litigation, mostly employment law, just down the street, like literally just down the street, at a law firm called Ad Astra Law Group, a little, very small firm. And then I'm also an alumni of the program from 2002, and I went to Foothill, but we are here to help everyone, so my Foothillness doesn't affect my love for all of you coming out to support We the People and work hard during the summer. Looking forward to working with you all.
Hi everyone, my name is Sabrina McGraw. I am a 2L at Berkeley Law. I'm also alumni of the program. I went to Amador in 2013.
Hey everyone, my name is Vikram Srikanti. I'm a third-year PhD student over at Berkeley, and I'm also an alumni of the program. I went to Foothill. I was in Unit 3 and graduated in 2012.
And
I'm Brian Ladd. This is my 27th year involved in the program. Some of these people were my students. Some of your coaches were my students. So I'm always available, and I have no job.
Okay, great. So we are, as I said earlier, we are Californians Advancing Civic Education. Our mission is to help you get the most out of your civic education program, get the most out of your We the People experience. We are here as a resource. As you go on throughout the year, we will be involved in judging at the district level, judging at the regional level. Many of us will judge at the state level. Some of us might judge at the national level. The point of our organization is to help you, to be a resource for you and for your teachers. I know that for those of you who have come to the previous sessions, you filled out some feedback forms, and we appreciate that. We really appreciate your feedback. We're passing out those forms now. These forms are going to serve two purposes. Again, for people who have been here before, you kind of know the drill. These are going to be your name placards. We're going to be splitting everybody up to do mock We the People sessions, and you're going to be writing on the back your name. First of all, you're going to fold it in 3 parts. Can I hold up Breen? So you're going to fold it like this, right? And then on one side, the side facing away from you, you're going to write your name, your high school. If you have any pronouns that you'd like us to use, you're going to write that, okay? And then at the end of the day, we're going to ask you to fill out the questions on the other side, which are just feedback to let us know. And we know that a lot of you have submitted feedback about the previous 2 sessions, and I wanted to address a couple of things that you brought up. We really appreciate the feedback that you've given. Some people have said that they wish that we went more in depth on some of the content issues that we've discussed. Earlier we discussed things like natural rights philosophy, classical Republican philosophy, how the branches interact, and we discussed them on a fairly surface level basis. And what I will just tell you is that your teachers will go so far in depth on all of these subjects. We could not possibly get in depth or get as in depth as we would like to in just a 3-hour session, especially in the summer. So don't worry about more cases and more information. You're going to get all of that stuff. These sessions are only here to make sure that, to give you that head start, to get you familiar with the information. The second thing that, the second feedback point that we got a lot was, how do we get in touch with you? How do you, the students, get in touch with us, CACE, going forward in the year? There's going to be lots of different ways in which you can keep in touch with us. One of the ways that we're rolling out this year for the first time is, has anybody heard of Slack? This app? Yes? Okay.
Instant messaging app.
Yes, it's very, very new and slick. The kids use it.
It's not that new.
It's not that new. So we're going to set up a Slack channel for each school. We're also going to set up a Slack channel for each unit in each school. So if you are, let's say, Unit 3 from Irvington, and you want to talk to a Unit 3 expert like Mr. Srikanti, who is in, where is he? There he is. Okay. Then you can just message us, CACE, and whoever is able to respond to your question, would this be a good piece of evidence to use? How do you like our testimony? We can respond that way. Your teachers should all have our emails as well. Most of us respond to emails, not all of us. But the Slack channel, it should be your primary method. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram. The kids like the Instagrams. We're Castagram on Instagram. I would love it if you would follow us, if only because we don't have that many followers.
That sounded kind of sad.
It does. It does. And then we also have Facebook, but I know none of you guys use that. So let's see. So
Can I make a comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Another thing that happens throughout the year a lot of times is the students will ask us to review their testimonies. And I'm speaking just for myself, but I think other people share this view, which is that it's very hard for us to spend a lot of time reviewing your full testimonies, before regionals, before state. And so what's a lot easier for us is if you reach out with specific questions. So for example, we want to use this quote, we don't know if it fits within the prompt. That's the kind of thing we can answer pretty quickly and give you good feedback Whereas, reading your entire 4-minute testimony, which is going to change over time a lot as well, becomes very time-consuming and hard for us to do, and so a lot of times we just have to punt on that. And the other reason why we sometimes won't do it, or at least for myself, is because I really want to be fair. If I review a testimony for Foothill, I feel that that's unfair that if I don't give equal time to reviewing some testimonies for the same unit for Amador or Irvington or whatever school is reaching out to me. So just keep that in mind. Keep your questions really targeted to us, and then we can give you good feedback. If you're asking for something really, really broad and open-ended and time-consuming, you may not actually get anything at all. So just something to keep in mind.
And if you do get responses, they may be totally random, or maybe some it's hard to answer questions if there's no question, right? If it's is this good or bad, we'll be well, kind of. So
yes,
you'll get better answers and more useful feedback if you ask better questions.
Yeah, that's right. Anyone else?
Well, just one thing from a kind of, I guess, Slack etiquette perspective. How many have used Slack before? It's not a ton. How many have used Facebook before? Okay, perfect. You know how on Facebook you can reply to a post, or you can reply to comments on a post? Yes? Does that make sense? Okay. So you can do the same thing in Slack. And the reason that I'm mentioning this is it's a whole lot easier for people to be able to find things and understand if everybody doesn't just run down like it's an instant messenger, but if somebody posts a question and then we can respond and other people can add in as a thread under that question. So, and it'll make a lot more sense once you start using it, but similar to Facebook, respond to the questions, not just another line, because then that will keep everything together and it'll make it a lot more referenceable for you in the future. The other nice thing that you can do with Slack is share files. So that's something that, instead of having to email back and forth, we're hoping that this year you'll be able to, share testimonies and say, hey, can you look at this paragraph for me or whatever. And it'll all stay there together. So the Slack channels will be unique to you. So, your Unit 3, other schools' Unit 3s won't have access to your Unit 3 channel, but we will also have a channel for everyone to be able to communicate. So if there are bigger questions about what's the format of the state competition or things like that, then you can communicate with all schools.
Right, and if a breaking news thing happens that directly affects all of the testimonies, Mr. Ladd might pop it in there and say, this is a thing that just happened that you might want to be aware of. Okay? So what we're going to be, I'm going to give you a little idea of what we're going to be doing today. Earlier this summer, we did Units 2 and 4 first. We did Units 1 and 6 then. So now we're going to be doing Units 3 and 5. People in the back are getting really excited. So Unit 3 is basically, the structure of Unit 3 is how has the Constitution changed from ratification to now. And it's changed in all sorts of different ways. It's changed through amendments, it's changed through interpretations, and it's changed through legislation. And then Unit 5 is basically focused on just the Bill of Rights and how the Bill of Rights affects you, and also how interpretations of the Bill of Rights have changed over time. You're going to be seeing a testimony from a distinguished group of national finalists from last year that are going to be testifying about Unit 3 and Unit 5 concepts. And then you're also going to be broken up into various subgroups, breakout groups, and you're going to be talking about We the People tips in general. You're also going to be preparing a testimony and doing a mock Q&A on the following question. Everybody write this down or remember it if you've got just the best memory of all time. What is the most important right in the Bill of Rights? Once again, that's what is the most important right in the Bill of Rights? Okay.
Question mark.
Question mark.
Question mark, yeah.
Question mark. Okay. So we also talked about the rubric and score sheet previously, and Ms. Mankowski is going to talk about some specific aspects of that.
Thank you, Mr. Woods. One other thing that I did want to address, this moves.
That's what wheels are for.
Yeah, that I did want to address in the feedback, because we got this from a number of students, and that was, can you please provide snacks? Yes, that was actually a very popular item of feedback, and I just wanted to address that because we would love to provide you with snacks, but one of the things to remember is that everything that we're doing here is on a volunteer basis. So we're volunteering our time. That's why we gave Ms. Brakefield a round of applause, is that her law firm is volunteering this space. They're not charging us for it. And so, when we can, we'll provide you with coffee and, sodas and those kinds of things, but it's really dependent upon the space that we're in and what kind of availability we have to those things. So, that said, and I also love snacks, so I understand where that's coming from. But, we've talked thus far about some of the different scoring criteria that we use. So we've talked about understanding and constitutional application and supporting evidence and participation thus far. So it stands to reason, see what I did there?
Haha.
That the
It's not that funny.
This is why you're doing this instead of me.
exactly because of that right there, nailed it. It stands to reason that we would cover the last two scoring criteria, and those are reasoning, get it, and responsiveness. So I know that for those of you who've been here before, you probably, hopefully you have seen these, but for those of you who are new, we wanted to make sure that everybody had them in their hands. And what you have is descriptions of the scoring criteria, because it's important to understand the differences between them, and then also criteria for how you're going to be scored. Now, just a reminder, the scoring in and of itself is somewhat subjective because it is based on the determination of the judges who are scoring the units. But we do use this as mostly a guideline for how we're going to score units. There's no easy, that was absolutely a 9 answer, because what may be a 9 to one may be an 8 to another. So, so let's talk through these a little bit. So the first one, reasoning, is basically what we're looking for. It's a little bit different from responsiveness than we've talked about before, but we're looking for your thought process here. So, to what extent are your arguments reflecting logical and critical thinking? So it's not just regurgitating facts to us. It's not just, giving us a whole bunch of dates and people's names or quotes from philosophers or things like that. It's really, what is your thought process in coming to the conclusions that you come to? Now, you should, and as it says, students should do more than provide examples, explain why the example is relevant. And this goes to what we were talking about before with supporting evidence. Evidence is great, but evidence should support your reasoning. It should support your arguments. It should not be a thing in and of itself. So, that last sentence is important too on the descriptions. This is the category from which points should be deducted if students present opinions or beliefs without reasons or explanations. So that's not to say do not give your opinions or beliefs. We absolutely want to hear those. A lot of times you'll get in Q&A from judges questions like, how do we fix this? And those are earnest questions because we are looking for ideas. We're looking for you to give your beliefs, give your thoughts, give your opinions. But all of those things must always be supported by evidence, which can be, other philosophers who thought that, counting you guys as philosophers here, could be, historical evidence, et cetera, et cetera. So the other criterion that we're going to be talking about is responsiveness. So responsiveness is how well did you respond to the question? One of the things that as we get into testimony writing, Mr. Woods and I are sticklers about, if you're asked a yes or no question, what should be the first word out of your mouth?
Yes or no.
Amen. Yes or no.
Or it depends.
Or it depends.
Lawyers.
Or I push back on the premise of the question. But exactly. So all of those things directly respond to what is being asked. That's what responsiveness is. It's how well are you responding to the question? Because it's so easy to just, filibuster your way out of answering something. Like, I'm not entirely sure I understand this question, so let me just throw a whole bunch of words at it. And we are looking at that is actually one of the grading criterion criteria is whether or not you are adequately responding to that.
And just to add on to that, like that applies to a variety of kinds of questions. Yes or no questions are an easy example, but if we ask for your opinion, or if we ask what a founder wrote on a particular topic or anything like that, you should have a very direct answer to that too, and then you should build on that. But you should always make sure you're answering the question in a very clear way, just so all the judges know exactly what your stance is on the issue that they're asking about.
Right. And one way that I would say, this is difficult, but it's something that you can do with practice, is if you get asked an open-ended question, for example, what did the founders think about the relationship between the branches? That's not a yes or no answer, right? Like, so you can't answer it with yes, no, or it depends. So the way that you would answer that question to make sure that you're being responsive in the way that you should is to use the words from the question to answer the question. So the question was, what did the founders think about the relationship between the branches? So your response is, the founders thought this about the relationship between the branches, or regarding the relationship between the branches, the founders thought X, or whatever. And I think that is a way, that is a technique. It's a lawyer technique, but it's a thing that you can do. You can really start practicing to make your answers more responsive.
Yeah, great point. So on the scoring guide, I'm not going to walk through every single one of these because hopefully you all can read. But I do want to talk about the 9 to 10 range, because this is what everybody should be shooting for. That's not to say that you will always score in the 9 to 10 range. If you did, then, yay, that's awesome. But this is what you should be aiming for, is that top level. So from a reasoning perspective, we're looking for strong support of positions with sound reasoning, that your conclusions are reached with consideration of opposing viewpoints, opinions, with reasons, noting relationships, grasping principles, and logical inferences. So we're looking for you to connect the dots in reasoning. We're looking for you to give good examples that support that reasoning and demonstrate that you're actually thinking through. On responsiveness, we're also looking for accurate and full response to all questions, main and sub questions, and then follow-up questions, so during the Q&A. So, if I ask you what's the most important rights in the Bill of Rights, and you start talking to me about the Articles of Confederation, is that responsive? Probably not. You could maybe find a way to weave that in, but probably not. So just like Mr. Wood said, responsiveness, we're looking for a direct correlation between what was asked and what is answered. Now, you can always throw in extra information, but always start off by being responsive, and that's going to help bring that score up. Anything else you want to add to that?
No.
Okay.
Any questions?
I'll say one other thing. So sometimes, especially as you get deeper and deeper into this program, you might think that it's best to use really obscure examples that are, they're responsive, but they're also obscure, rather than just going to the obvious direct answer that all the judges are going to know. And so I would suggest to you that you need to balance out that instinct, because if there's a really clear answer about something that Thomas Jefferson wrote, you should say that rather than going way into the annals of history to find some really off reference that nobody's ever heard of. So just keep that in mind. Don't shy away from the obvious just because it's obvious.
That's a great point, because sometimes being super crafty makes you unresponsive.
Okay.
So we are looking for creative ideas and examples, but at the same time there's a reason why certain things, certain pieces of evidence, and certain reasoning and certain quotes from philosophers, whatever, are used over and over again. It's because they work, because they fit. There are definitely times when I'm scoring and somebody doesn't say a whole bunch of things that I'm expecting them to say because they're being really crafty, and it actually feels unresponsive to the question. With that,
okay.
I think we're going to move on to...
Yeah, so do we want to
pass
that out? Mm-hmm. So we're going to be passing out a Unit 5 chart, which is an incorporation chart. Who knows what incorporation is? What is incorporation?
Incorporation basically means that you have federal laws being applied to the state.
That's right. And in this case, so the answer was incorporation basically means you have federal laws that are applied to the states. Really, incorporation is about applying the Bill of Rights specifically to the states. Prior to the 14th Amendment, the Civil Rights Amendments, the Bill of Rights only applied to the federal government. After the Civil War amendments, there was a process called incorporation. You're going to learn all about it. But what we're passing out is a chart of all of the rights in the Bill of Rights that the United States Supreme Court has deemed important enough, indeed fundamental enough, to be applied to the states as well. So with that, we're going to take a little bit of a break. We're going to ask our alumni panel to come up, and we're going to have them do a testimony.
So we're taking a break?
Well, it's going to take...
Yeah. We're not taking a break where they get up in the front
No,
of their seats.
no.
Yeah. So if the alumni can please come forward.
Thank you.
Watch your noggin. I said watch your noggin.
Okay, so if you guys can be over here, we're gonna ask you. Hang on, judges. Judges, if you guys can meet out there, we're gonna have them stand up.
Oh, for the judges.
You have too much power to the state. You don't mind. Oh, no.
Oh, it's legally.
Alright, alumni panel should be on this side.
But then the Constitution those who like the Constitution are federalists and those who don't like the Constitution are anti-federalists. The main thing that the anti-federalists are doing is
Thank you.
it's because it didn't have a Bill of Rights. Also, Bill of Rights were added in the beginning. I was yeah, it was in the end, but then
One more
in
chance.
the Constitution, the Bill of Rights are already getting it.
She's getting one, yeah. Can we start like this and open like this? Yeah, I like that.
We need another chair.
The voting rights, but then it's not, there's a law, there's the 18th, there's the 17th, the 19th, there's the 20th, yeah, it goes like that. So I'm just voting. I feel like I want to say 19th.
So you're gonna start.
Okay, yeah, it should go. I'll check, but I'm fairly sure.
I'd like to enjoy.
And all the time.
Miss Nayar. Yeah, we'll just say it. And so I said the word couples.
So we're gonna play this like it is a competition, okay? And so what we have here are the distinguished alumni panel who have written a testimony, a whole dang testimony, but they're never gonna get like credit for it. It's not gonna be like used in a competition or anything like that. But they took time out of their summer to write a testimony on actual substantive stuff and to come here and deliver it. That's the level of like civic duty and responsibility that they're demonstrating. So, but we're gonna run this like it's going to be like it is a competition. So the judges are out in the hallway, okay? So what's gonna happen is the judges, the alumni judges, are gonna come in here in just a second, right? Okay, in just a second. And as they walk in the room, everybody is gonna stand up, okay? Until the judges tell you to sit down. Everybody ready for that? No? You're not? Are you sure? Let me, okay, now you're ready. Okay. Okay, ready? All right, so we're all waiting. It's a competition. Imagine we're at the state competition. Okay, judges. Everybody else.
Maybe try not to giggle. Judges.
Very good.
Social powers.
So, who's the judge? Yeah. Yes.
So we'll introduce ourselves, then you introduce yourselves, then we can begin.
Speak
All
up.
right. So yeah. Introductions come first. My name is Maggie Wade. I'm an alumni from 2017-2018, and I was in Unit 5. My name is Charlie Doss. I was also class of 18. I thought I Unit 1.
I'm Mariah. I was also class of 18 and I was in Unit 6.
And I'm Nithya, also in class of 18 and I'm in Amador Unit.
Right. Good morning. My name is Leland Zhang. I'm from Unit 5 last year from Foothill High School.
Good morning. My name is Tiffany Jang and I'm a former alumni of Unit 5 from Amador Valley High School.
Hi, I'm Elise Allery. I'm an alumni of Unit 3 from Amador from last year.
And I'm Kyle McGarity. I'm an alumni from Unit 4 from Amador, and we'd like to thank you for listening to our testimony, and we'd also like to thank our timer, Miss Nayar. Mr. Clint.
Yes, that's right. Okay.
All right. Should we read the question?
Yeah, you can read the question.
Some scholars say that Chief Justice John Marshall's opinion in Marbury v. Madison, 1803, established the power of judicial review. Others say that the framers intended the judiciary to have that power from the outset. Which position do you agree with and why? And what evidence can you cite for your positions? What are some ways that judicial review has been used to affect constitutional change? You may begin when you're ready.
The framers established a constitution meant to withstand the test of time. In order to do so, judicial review, which is the court's authority to review the constitutionality of a legislative act or executive action, has been necessary. However, the controversy lies in whether the framers intended for the judiciary to have the power of judicial review from the outset, since judicial review is written nowhere in the Constitution.
Tiffany and I believe that the framers intended for the judiciary to have the power of judicial review, even without its explicit enumeration. In order to maintain a written constitution, the framers looked to states such as New York, Pennsylvania, and Connecticut who had forms of judicial review. For example, Article 47 of Pennsylvania's state constitution provided a form of judicial review through the Council of Censors, whose duty was to inquire whether the Constitution has been upheld.
The necessity of judicial review emerged because the framers recognized that the Constitution can only be preserved through the impartial courts of justice. Alexander Hamilton emphasized in Federalist 78 that the duty of the courts must be to declare all acts contrary to the Constitution void. Without judicial review, the framers feared that the legislature would not uphold the Constitution except of their own accord.
However, Leland and I argue that judicial review lacked any legal basis until it was established by the Supreme Court. At the Philadelphia Convention, framers such as Rufus King and John Dickinson disagreed with having an unelected body striking down laws passed by the people's representatives. Furthermore, James Madison himself refused to extend the jurisdiction of the court to cases arising under the Constitution. The lack of enumeration of judicial review perpetuated the confusion over the court's powers.
This uncertainty resulted in a weak, inefficient judiciary, causing the first Chief Justice, John Jay, to lament that the court lacked energy, weight, and dignity. It was not until Marbury v. Madison, 1803, where Section 13 of the Judiciary Act of 1789 was deemed unconstitutional, that the Supreme Court gained influence. Chief Justice Marshall established judicial review, writing that it is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is.
Regardless of how judicial review was established, it remains crucial for the Constitution to adapt to a continuously evolving society. With judicial review, the court interprets and applies clauses into new contexts, affecting constitutional change. For example, in Gitlow v. New York, 1925, the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment was interpreted to apply the Free Speech Clause to the states, thereby establishing the doctrine of selective incorporation. This doctrine gave the court the ability to apply clauses of the Bill of Rights against the states in order to protect individual liberties. As a result, the influence of the federal judiciary increased, shifting the balance of American federalism.
Not only did judicial review change the structure of American governance, but also the structure of American society. During the Civil Rights Movement, the court reevaluated the interpretation of the Equal Protection Clause, expanding the civil rights of all citizens. For instance, in Brown v. Board of Education, 1954, Chief Justice Warren struck down the separate but equal doctrine, arguing that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal, thus ending de jure segregation in the United States.
Judicial review has further affected constitutional change in the form of substantive due process. The 14th Amendment, which states that no state may deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, has been interpreted to grant the judiciary the power to protect fundamental rights, despite the lack of enumeration in the Constitution. For example, in Griswold v. Connecticut, 1965, the court interpreted the Bill of Rights to establish an individual's right to privacy.
The Constitution sets forth a framework of key principles essential to our democracy. Judicial review has allowed justices to interpret and apply these principles to modern society. Thus, it is the most important tool of the judiciary, upholding the integrity of the Constitution. Thank you.
So you guys briefly mentioned the debates about the judiciary's power at the Constitutional Convention. Why did the framers eventually create the judiciary to be counter-majoritarian, and do you guys agree with this?
Well, it's difficult to say that the court necessarily intended or didn't intend for the court to be counter-majoritarian based off of the framer. Many framers, like John Dickinson and James Wilson, feared a counter-majoritarian court which would rule against the people's branch because they had just been under the English rule where that was happening often inside the colonies itself. However, on the other hand, you can look to other framers such as Alexander Hamilton, who did want the court to be counter-majoritarian because it wanted an enlightened branch to uphold the Constitution itself.
Additionally, it was a good idea for the Supreme Court to be insulated a lot from public opinion and public sway because they wanted the justices to uphold the Constitution, not necessarily what the legislative and executive branch pushed it to do or what the people pushed it to do, but to uphold the constitutional law through the test of time. So it was a good idea to be counter-majoritarian at the time.
You mentioned that it was an insulated branch, so it kind of gives the judicial branch a lot of power, and with that comes judicial review. Do you think there should be a check on that? Because currently in the Constitution there isn't really an established check on judicial review.
Well, there isn't an inherent established check on the judiciary in the Constitution. I do believe that there is a check by the people on the judiciary. When public will goes against what the judicial branch is ruling, they will refuse to hear a case. So, for example, after Brown v. Board in 1954, another case was supposed to be heard by the Supreme Court, known as Name v. Name 1954. However, Justice Black refused to hear that case because he thought that, and the case was on interracial couples marrying, and he refused to hear the case because he didn't want to upset the South and have them go into open rebellion.
The Supreme Court also recognizes that a lot of the justification for where their power comes from is through public acceptance. So this doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be swayed by the public every single time, but we do see prime examples such as Minersville v. Gobitis 1940, where the Supreme Court ruled that students are forced to salute the flag and stand, even if it violates some sort of their own belief. But because of the public backlash and a lot of the media insulting the court for saying that this is a violation of a person's free speech, it was overturned.
Later, the court in 1943, in the case West Virginia v. Barnett, decided that silencing a person's freedom of speech is actually counterproductive towards the values that the nation holds. And in this case, the Justice Black decided that it was necessary for them to overturn the previous decision because of the backlash they faced from the public.
In your testimony, you discuss a continuously evolving society. Do you think that constitutional convention might be better suited for constitutional issues than allowing the court to use judicial review?
Absolutely not. Even at the convention, the framers didn't understand what a constitutional convention would even look like. George Mason at the Virginia Ratifying Convention on December 17th admitted to the convention that they didn't know what a constitutional convention would even look like. Who would be involved? Would it be delegates like the Philadelphia Convention? So even today, that would become more complex with more states and more ideological fights that we're having today. So absolutely not.
And I actually think that judicial review is sufficient in protecting people's rights. We can see in the case CACE v. U.S. 1967 that the court used its power of substantive due process to find the right of the reasonable expectation of privacy. And this right to privacy has constantly fluctuated and changed and allowed people in the modern context to uphold their rights without having to hold a constitutional convention.
Okay. What are some examples of the judiciary applying constitutional principles in the modern context?
So, for example, we can look to the Fourth Amendment, which has been a major issue in recent cases. The Supreme Court recently decided on U.S. v. Carpenter 2018, where they said that it was unconstitutional to use cell site location data to track a person without a warrant. And so this was applying the Fourth Amendment principle of protection against unreasonable searches and seizures for the judicial branch to protect that Fourth Amendment even today in 2018.
We can also look to the Equal Protection Clause, who has grown has evolved into protecting other groups other than race. For example, in Craig v. Boer in 1973, the court expanded the Equal Protection Clause to not only include race, but also have an intermediate scrutiny group of sex and gender.
Okay. Do you believe that there should be an amendment to accompany the right to privacy established by judicial review?
I don't think so. I think the court has sufficiently used its power to establish to uphold the idea of privacy throughout history. For example, in Kyle v. U.S. 2001, the court updated the reasonable expectation of privacy standard to include thermal imaging data. And so, in that way, the court has been able to keep up with the modern context without having to resort to an amendment.
I agree with Leland. I think that the judicial branch has done a sufficient job in protecting our rights. For example, if we look to Meyer v. Nebraska in 1923, another case about privacy, Justice Douglas actually said that we didn't need to enumerate it because enumerating every single inherent right we had could lead to elimination, but also privacy was so inherent in a person's daily life that it came before the Constitution and before the Bill of Rights that we didn't need another amendment or another right to make it explicit.
Not only that, but I don't think that we even could pass an amendment that would. I don't think we could pass another amendment because there isn't enough public support for the privacy. We already have the Fourth Amendment, which has been stretched in order to protect electronics and technology, but because there's so few people out there who would need who support another amendment for privacy, it wouldn't be passed. We can actually see that even when there was public outcry during the 1930s against children working in coal mines, they still couldn't even get an amendment passed.
Do you guys think the founders intended for judicial review to happen, or is it just a byproduct of the constitutional structures, judicial branch?
The framers definitely did intend for judicial review to happen. Often in the convention, we see the framers talking about how the court will protect the Constitution. If the law goes against it, they will rule it null and void. The problem wasn't with judicial review or the idea of striking down laws. The problem itself was how much power the judiciary would have. We can even see with James Madison, on August 27th, he says the court shouldn't have this power, but then on August 28th, he says the courts will have that power. So there's this back and forth of the power of the court itself, not judicial review.
I agree. Delegates such as James Wilson and George Mason also echoed Alexander Hamilton's thoughts in Federalist 78. They agreed that the judicial branch should be given a sort of power like judicial review because that was the only way that they could possibly check the executive and legislative without becoming overly active.
I disagree. Supreme Court Justice John Jay didn't even show up to the very first Supreme Court meeting, as well as two other justices. And so because the Supreme Court didn't even know what its powers were, I believe that the founders they didn't tell the Supreme Court what their powers are. And so because of that, judicial review was not inherent.
Time.
I thought that you guys were really responsive, and I thought you had a variety of examples and a good testimony in situations.
Yeah, I agree. I thought responsiveness was really good, and I like giving you stuff like evidence and
A little spicy. I really like that you had disagreement at multiple points, not just in testimony, but also in hot seat. That was really, Elise, I think there was one question, I don't remember which one it was, but you jumped in right away. You had a really good emphatic answer. You answered it right away, which was really good responsiveness and great citation. So I agree with all of my judges. I really liked your responsiveness, especially Elise. That was a really good answer to the question that I asked. And for the case citation, especially Unit 5, I'm really proud of you guys for bringing all of the necessary. I had a couple written down earlier, and I was like, okay, they're just checking it off of all of my lists. And responsiveness was really good. I did feel like the panel was a little bit weighted in the middle, but that's just because you guys were super passionate, and a little bit more practice would have been all good. So great job, guys. 10 out of 10.
missing people.
Yeah, there were
3
some that
hours
went to the
away.
restroom.
Because I made my reservation like 2 months ago, but I know I need to finish studying. I was like okay with my scores.
Counter-majoritarian means against the majority. So counter-majoritarian, right? What? Latin roots? I got Latin roots.
Do you like the biscuits?
Thank you. Okay, so what we're going to be doing now, and folks who have come to sessions previously, we usually wait until the end to break people up, to put people into units. We're going to do that at this point right now. And it's this very exciting thing that we get to do right now, where we get to count from 1 until 12. So exciting. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to go through and count people off. We're going to start at 1, then when we get to 12, we're going to start over at 1 again.
What?
I know. Really exciting, really difficult, advanced stuff. Yeah. Everybody's going to remember their number, and then everybody is going to meet with their number. So if you're number 2, you're going to find all the other number 2s. If you're number 6, you're going to find all the other number 6s. We're going to break up into 4 separate groups. Okay? Units, or yeah, we'll just call them units. Units, groups, whatever they are. 1 through 3 are going to stay here with me and Miss Brakefield. Units 4, 5, and 6 are going with Mr. Gentry. Units 7 through 9 are going
with Sabrina and Ladd.
With Sabrina and Mr. Ladd. Sabrina, you're just
sorry.
Sorry, Miss McGraw. And then units 10 through 12 are going to go with Ms. Minkowski and Mr. Srikanti. Okay? Does anybody have any questions? Okay. Very simple. All right, so I'm going to start over here.
1,
Okay.
2, 3, 4, 5.
Great.
6, 7,
8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Great.
1, 2, 3,
Nailed it.
4, 5,
6, 7, 8, 9, 10,
11,
1, 2,
3, 4, 5,
6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Anybody else? Okay. Does everybody remember the number? I hope so. Okay. 1 through 3 is to stay in this room.
Oh, okay.
7, 8, 9.
Are you done with, or you want to finish it? Or I'll be late. You want it? I have another packet. Like I can eat it on the way back. Later? Okay. On the other side as well. It didn't sound like a word.
Can you take some of these with us? Yes.
So where on the other side?
I don't know. Maybe we can Please, I'm not walking.
And then alumni.
Yes, you're ready for
Hold on. I'm busy. Wait, where's our last one? 4?
I guess so.
Are you 1? I'm a 4.
She's a 1.
Three. Hey, sorry, you're a 3.
I'm a 3 of us.
I was 4, didn't I? Yeah.
Are you guys all 3s?
Yeah, sweet. We're all gonna chill here. Do we want to sit right here? Yeah, sure.
Sit with your units.
I'm in 11th.
I'm sure.
12. Yes, 12.
What do you recommend I take 4, 5, 6?
Wait, Amy forgot name too.
Yeah.
You guys are. Are you guys uniform? So I realize this is sort of weird that this is a big group. So if you guys want to move forward a little bit, that might be nice.
Guys, you
want to move forward? Oh, yes. I can move forward. Wait, how forward? Like that?
It's like it's a big room, so like it's just weird that I have to shout to talk to you when there aren't that many people.
Do you guys want to move here or like up here? Where would you prefer us to be?
It's up to you. It's entirely up to you.
We can just speak here. Sounds good.
Yeah, we know. Facebook knows.
My name's
No. Okay, we can pull up here.
I don't. It's
Sick stuff. Whoops, sorry.
over here, like out there. I know you were black. Why would you me that way? I was either.
Thank you. You guys want to flip around to this side? Yeah.
Lots of emails.
Okay. So nervous. Okay, so what we're doing is
What are we going over?
I've never seen that. I feel like you just give you a topic and say like talk. Just give them what do you know about it. Facing
Cool. I'll add a subtitle just so it has your name.
Yeah. I appreciate that.
We're done. So.
they're not being like specifically informed as well. They're not like trying to go to their own research.
No problem.
Thank you. So you guys from where are you guys from?
I'm from Amador.
Where? Irvington. Okay.
You guys Foothill?
Yes.
I think you guys have to split up, right?
So should we
Where
just go
do
into it?
we need
Yeah.
volunteers?
So what did you say that you knew?
So initially, initially I was thinking the first.
Okay, before you guys get started, I know you guys are all like, you want to get started and do your testimonies, or start writing your testimonies, and that's fine and understandable. But like, we have some time. You're gonna have plenty of time to write your testimonies. I realize that you guys want to get started, but I've just passed out sort of a sheet on what successful We the People teams do. This breakout session right now, we have more time to ask questions and go over this sheet and talk about what successful We the People teams do. So I'll ask you to hold off on actually starting to write your testimony now. Okay? Does that make sense? And I know that some of you might have had questions that you wanted to ask and didn't get a chance to. But like I said, I've handed out. Yep. Take the rest. That's fine. Handed this out. I can go over it. We can talk about it. What do you want to do?
Why don't we go one by one and just see if they have any questions?
Okay. Does anybody have any additional questions that you didn't get a chance to ask the panel before as to what good We the People teams do?
Well, I was gonna ask, like, when writing your testimony, what did you find was most successful for you?
Like editing wise?
Sure.
So one thing that we really focused on was to not get too attached to like the first draft you write. Like you probably think, oh, like this is so amazing, I love this piece of evidence to put in. But I think the best testimonies are when you send it to CACE, like, right, and then have them edit it, and you really want to take their suggestions. But another thing is, when you ask like multiple people at once and they're all giving you different feedback, at the end of the day, it is your testimony, right? It's like what you guys feel comfortable running through. And so I would say the edits that you put in should be what your unit actually believes in, and you're ready to support it in like in Q&A.
How much time did you guys spend really hashing out the questions verbally and meeting with sister units and just exploring the boundaries of what's possible in the question before you start writing?
A lot of time. Like you have to meet in person. You have to like sit there and discuss the ideas, and like that's why like people say it's so time consuming, because sometimes you'll feel like you might be like, oh, like we didn't even write anything today, like all we did was talk. But like don't like overlook that. Like talking is important to discuss your ideas, and then like you can implement it, and like kind of you'll fall a little bit into the like natural roles. Like try not to do it too much. Like oh he does X, Y, Z, and just like stick with those. Like try to kind of switch it up a bit, but it's okay. Like there's gonna be someone who's like naturally better at writing, so like to have them edit and to have them write is okay as long as everyone's pitching into the ideas, but also everyone should write. But like you can have someone like clean it up at the end and have someone be like, oh I'm looking for evidence, things like that. But just make sure everyone's participating and you talk about the ideas.
One thing that I always notice when I'm reviewing testimonies specifically is that I can tell when there's like one person who has written the whole damn thing, you know, and like when there are units where there's not a balance in who's pitching in. Like I definitely notice when it's like one person who's always emailing, one person who's always like saying, okay, I wrote it this way, I wrote it that way. And the problem with that is that when you're writing your testimonies, you're actually like learning the content. And so like the testimony might be great, but then the Q&A will come and only one person will answer the questions because they're the only person who knows the answers because they spent the time to write it out and do things like that. So there really does have to be a balance, and you're right, Kala, that like there's always going to be sort of a natural, some people are better at X or Y, but everybody's got to participate. I can't tell you how many times and how many units I've seen where, man, there's like 2 people in this unit who are rock stars and 2 people in this unit who are not, and like who are not putting in the work, and it shows. So, yeah.
Just to piggyback off what Clint said, the thing is, you know, if you have a testimony that's really only has one voice in it, like if it's only kind of written by one person, then the implication is that you have essentially let that person write the entire thing. And if you let one person control your entire testimony, I don't care if that person thinks they're amazing at writing. They're probably going to put too much in it. They're going to go off in weird directions with it. It's going to be too overstuffed. And the whole idea here is that it needs to be a product of all your voices, because if you let one person go too far with it, then you're going to end up with something bloated and messy. You want to be constantly challenging, saying, do we need that sentence? Do we need that phrase? Do we need that in there? And kind of constantly refining.
We're also going to be doing a testimony writing workshop in October. We've done it every year, the last several years. So hopefully it'll be after you guys are set into your units. And we're going to be talking specifically about how to write a testimony. The sheet mentions something here, or mentions a few things about how to write your testimony, and one thing that we try and recommend it at all times, and this is how I write briefs when I'm writing them to file in court, is I outline them before I write it. So here are the points that I need to make, and so usually I take the question that gets asked, like when you're writing your testimonies, there's always a 3-part question. So part 1, and so I diagram all of the subparts of that question and write out answers to them, and then I go back and like actually write after I've outlined. It's really important to have that outline, because that way when you go into a practice and you say, okay, my answer to this part of the question is X, and Ms. Brakefield says that is a stupid answer, then you don't have to like chuck your whole testimony. You can just go back to your outline and say, oh, it's just this part that needs to change. Do you have another question?
No. Just jazz hands. That's fair.
Did you guys, so when you guys were prepping for regionals, talking about regionals, so the way this works for you guys is in Northern California, there's a Northern California regional competition. It'll happen in early December, and if you do well enough in that Northern California regional competition, you'll qualify for the state competition that happens in February. So when you guys were prepping for regionals, what were the toughest challenges for you guys, and how did that change between regionals and state?
I'd probably say, because I wasn't great at writing, but I was good at researching. And so I would find like little tidbits of information that would be able to answer like really specific questions, and we would sometimes put them into our testimony. But the problem with that arises is that sometimes you would have like certain people that didn't understand what it was that was in the testimony. And so if you guys are a part of a unit and you don't understand like every single piece of evidence used in your testimony, because at least one of the judges eventually is going to ask you like, hey, what is this, or like, how did that really exemplify that? So you guys really have to know what's in your testimony.
I think for my unit, we were Unit 5, so we were heavy on case law. The biggest thing that changed from our improvement to state was really deciding which evidence to cite during Q&A. So in the beginning at regionals, we thought it was just, all case law. Like, as long as you cite a case for every answer, you're basically going to get all the points. But then we realized that was incorrect. Like, it's not just naming the case and then stating like a couple of facts and then moving on. It's really breaking it down. So it's better for one unit to sort of like drop one case and then each person giving their own analysis or like the dissenting and majority opinions, instead of each individual just dropping random cases and then thinking that you're done. So the biggest improvement for us that we needed was to really analyze our evidence, not only for ourselves when we were researching, but also explaining it and breaking it down for the judges, because state is at a higher level where you need that extra depth and analysis to get those points.
To add to what Tiffany said, for Unit 5 in particular, they need to know the case law. And you're used to doing things in research papers in school where you're getting your bits of evidence, and it's tempting to go to OEAs and get the little case brief. But remember, your judges are people, by and large, who have attended law school, studied these cases in law school, know the dissents, they know the reasoning, and so they might be tempted to ask you something that goes a little bit deeper than you might just get out of the case brief. And so there was a point in time where you guys started reading the cases and the dissents, and that eventually becomes really important.
My unit was a little different going from regionals to states because we lost people. We went from 5 to 3, so like I guess that's the biggest change, but that's like not really something that's like in your control. But I think like the biggest improvement we went because we had less people was kind of like the way we look at evidence, and I think evidence definitely got stronger because like we were all like kind of knew what to research at that point, because you're still really confused like even going into regionals, but then at states you start like finding your go-to sources. Like I really like to go to like research institutes, as long as you have to make sure they're not like super biased towards one political party, but if they're like legit like think tanks, a lot of those like have really good articles and sources that sometimes like directly like support your topics, so that's like something that I thought was a big improvement.
My unit I think we actually did better at regionals than we did at states. Like we had this really one weird question that we like completely like never really got the grasp of, and I think that like really hurt us at states. But I think overall, like kind of just trusting your unit mates, like I like don't think like it's just like they might be saying something like, I have to be like thinking of like something that's like different, and like what if they like say something bad. Like you want to think like, okay, they got this, like they know what they're talking about, and I need something like to have something to say that will support what they're saying.
Do you have a question? Yeah.
Why did your unit drop to 3?
One of the girls, kind of like her family was like kind of like dealing with a lot of stuff, and she just is for personal reasons, and like the other guy had like a different time commitment. But even before they dropped, like it was clear that they were kind of either considering dropping because they weren't like putting in the time commitment, which kind of really affected our unit dynamic and made it really difficult for us to do well at regionals because like they weren't carrying their share. So like it was kind of better for them to drop, and I think they made the better decision for themselves too, because like if you think it's going to be too much for you and your like mental health, like that's definitely like not something you should like put before, so it just depends from person to person.
So would they adjust and give you more, like with the groups, or did you stay with 3 units for the rest of the year?
So we stayed with 3 people for the rest of the year, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, typically units can be like, I think the lowest I've ever seen in a California state competition was 3 people in terms of the number, but they can be as many as 6. So, you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, what kind of problems did you guys run into, like, whether it be, like, researching, like, finding information, or, like, testimonies, or, like, team dynamics, that kind of stuff, and, like, how did you handle that?
I think, like,
without throwing your teammates under the bus.
Yeah. I think, like, maybe just finding your place. Like, I feel like at the beginning of, like, when we first got our units, I was like, I have to do everything. I have to write the testimony, I have to do this, and I have to do that. And it's like, well, like, I had 2 unit mates in particular that were, like, really into, like, writing testimonies, like, they're very good writers. And, like, I feel like me and, like, my 2 other, so I was in a unit of 5. Okay, so me and, like, 2 other of my unit mates, like, we would write something, and then the 2 other people would, like, just like change it. And so like that was we were like, what the heck, like we're trying to write this testimony and like they're just changing it. But then they were changing it kind of like for the better, and we found like our dynamic was that they were the best at like testimony writing, and like we were very good at like researching. And it's not like just stay in like your bubbles, like, oh, I only research, like obviously like I would look at the testimony and stuff, but finding where you can apply your strengths.
The biggest technical problem we had writing testimony, which was like later on fixed by the time of state and nationals, was making it interesting. Like to get good points and really make the judges engaged, not only during Q&A, but when you're presenting your testimony, is not just answering like each question or even just going in order, but it's to think about like, why are they actually asking this question and how can we make it interesting? Like for each of our testimonies, by the time we got to the national level, had some sort of theme. Like for our Fourth Amendment, it was security versus privacy. Like we always had a theme that would tie the whole thing together, and that was also easier to organize the structure of our testimony, and it was just easier to write and break down in general, and the judges were actually interested. They always commented and said, oh, I liked it, it was so much better to follow along. So I think for testimony, it's not just about, oh, like let's just get it over with so I can go do my math homework later or present it. The amount of effort you put in to make it interesting is really going to reflect, and the judges are going to like it.
So one of the problems my unit always had was we didn't feel like we knew enough. Like there was always questions that the judges would ask us during like practice testimonies in which we just have no idea how to answer. So the way we solved this was, first off, the Constitution. Like if you guys can just memorize like key important clauses, Article 1, Section 8 is your friend, and just all of Article 2.
It's not that long.
It's a short one. If you guys can just like memorize key important clauses in there, then you'll be like so much better prepared to answer just about any question the judge can throw at you, because you're going to be like, oh, well, Congress can do this according to this such and such, and it's so like it's not hard to do because you all have a constitution, or at least you should, or you'll get one eventually. I don't know, but
they can look it up.
It's online.
It's online.
It's not hard to read it because it's only a couple hundred words, but if you can use it as evidence, judges will be amazed.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest difficulties was finding like a balance between spending time on your testimony and spending time working on Q&A, because like you're graded on both, and it's not like there's a section for testimony, it's a section for Q&A. You have to hit those 6 points on the rubric through both of them. So one thing that you have to accept is that your testimony is never going to be perfect. That is something that you're just like, you're going to be like, oh, like I'm so frustrated, like this part I still don't think has like, that's the most creative answer we can get, like I think that's boring or that sucks, but like you just have to like kind of hash it out and like kind of leave it, because at some point you're going to need to work on Q&A. But on the other hand, flip side, you can't like spend all your time on Q&A because those two things are connected and have like a trash testimony. So you have to like, but I did wish we spent more time just kind of sitting down and prepping Q&A. Like you ask me a question, I ask you a question, and we like brainstorm like all kinds of questions that we might be asked. So yeah.
Yeah, I want to follow up on a couple of things that have been said. Tiffany mentioned, having a theme and making sure that everything's interesting. And as a judge, I appreciate that. But the thing that I'm judging you on is whether you've answered the question. Now, themes make it easier for judges to understand that you're answering the question because it's more engaging. But the most important thing, I can't emphasize this enough, is to actually answer the question in the testimony. I agree that there's no way that any testimony that you're writing at any level, there's no way you can answer it thoroughly in the test in the 4 minutes you're provided. But you have to answer it. You have to give an answer. And the reason why is, let me get somebody have a pen.
Right below. You open that one up. I think there are pens in there.
So when I'm judging, let's see. This is the kind of rubric that I draw. It's basically just sort of like this general rubric on a piece of paper, and let's say I'm judging Irvington. I'll write Irvington, and let's say there's 4 people in the unit. I'll have like 4 little things right there, and so each one of the testimony questions you're going to get is going to have 3 different parts, and so I will literally go like, oh, they're answering the first part of the question. Did they answer it? Yes, and I'll write a little check right there on the first one. Okay, and then like second part, they'll like, I don't know, and like maybe they don't answer that, so I'll write a little like, nope, they get no points for that part, right? And then but they answer the third part, I'll write another check. And that'll be how at the end of the rounds, I'll go back and when I'm filling in scores, that's how I remember, oh, they didn't answer the second part of the question very well in the testimony. And then the parts below are for individual Q&A questions, and I'll jot notes about the Q&A questions as they go. So it's just really important that you know, like I said, like we're kind of hammering answering the questions.
Can I ask you a question about
Sure.
that? So Mr. Woods is judging, he's marking whether you've answered the question or not answered the question. There's also the important point that you don't want to have answered the question but not have them notice that you answered the question.
Right.
So there are ways to highlight that.
Right, and that's what we call, and we'll get into this when you start writing testimonies, what we call signposting and road mapping. That's how we do it. And basically, it's signposting is like using the words from the question to answer the question, kind of what we told them earlier. And road mapping is at the very beginning, you tell us what you're going to say. Mm-hmm. It's like English class and whatnot, and we'll get into that once you're actually starting to write testimonies. Back there.
So you mentioned briefly about like prepping for Q&A. So what are your tips for prepping for Q&A?
I'm glad you asked that question. There are some here on this little handout that we gave you, and I don't know if these resonate with any of you guys. I'll let you guys answer that question, and then I'll fill in.
I think don't be afraid of like disagreement. Like I think it's very easy to fall into like, oh, like they think that, like my unit mates, like they think that, so like, you know, I'll back them up and stuff. But like definitely like it brings more nuance if you like disagree. Like I was kind of like known for being like the disagreeer in like my unit. So like they would like have this opinion and then like I'm like, no, like this is like the opposite. Like for example, like our last our like for nationals, one of our questions was about like states' rights, right? And so I think all four of my four other unit mates were like for the federal government, but didn't want to be alone, so one of them like fate switched over to like states. But then I was like super states' rights, and I remember like during our when we presented it was the 11-minute Q&A one, and this like one of the judges kept trying to trip me up, and she'd be like, oh, is this supposed to be states' rights or federal? And I kept saying like states, no, it's states, it's always states. And so like she was thinking like, oh, you're liberal, like you're probably gonna be like more on the federal, like for the like rights for the federal government. But I kept like going with states' rights, and she definitely did like that. I think that helped us in the end.
I'd say like just do your research, whatever, like you'll find out whatever works for you. Like I know some units do Quizlets, some units like do like physical flashcards, some of them, but like for our unit, what we did was like because there are 3 of us and there's 3 questions, we each like were in charge of one like prep like research bank, and so we would just like upload all sorts of documents and like the evidence we found was important, and we like highlighted the ones we think were the most important and just anything we thought, and then we printed them for like each other. I wouldn't suggest like having one person just like each person being a super expert, because then like you get unbalanced. But like if you're in charge of a question, then people will be able to like kind of trust you more. So make sure you know everything, but it's okay to like specialize in something. And then I'd say just like make sure you do your research and practice. Have a question bank. I know most schools like do it where like when you practice in class, somebody will track questions and write down the questions you get in class, so that you have a list of all the questions you've ever been asked before, and then you can practice from those.
The best way that we prepared for Q&A was to actually practice Q&A, whether it's in class and like you get roasted by the entire class and all your teachers, or you're meeting with your sister units on weekends. It was just good because by the time we got to competition, there wasn't like really a question that we never had before. Like it would be in different forms obviously, but it would be asking the same underlying issue. So I would say like the best way to prepare is just to keep like doing it.
Yeah, and I think generally, I've seen a tendency, especially early on, for folks to get too like immersed in learning and not practicing enough. And so when we have our first few practices, it's like dead stares when we ask a question. And part of that, it's not that you folks don't know the answer generally, and somebody has something to say. It's that you haven't practiced enough having that feeling of somebody just asking you something out of the blue that you're like, I have no idea. So I really recommend early on just like practicing. Even if you don't know, just try to come up with something, and you'll get used to like understanding that you can say something and just get through it, because the blank stares like are awful, and they happen all the time early on because of the lack of practice. So I definitely would take that advice.
Yeah, I would point to, there's a lot of answers to that question on this like tips and tricks thing. Just a couple, consuming 3 to 5 sources of news and current events per day. That's for Q&A a lot of times. It's like, oh, something just happened. President Trump did something, right? And so anytime you get a question about executive power, you can be like, well, yesterday President Trump issued an executive order via Twitter to do X or Y, and that's something that you can bring up, right? Debating your positions on the issues with your teammates, like Mariah was talking about. So you're debating. So I'm going to take a position that the judicial branch is the most important branch. Everybody knows on the unit that Clint's going to talk about the judicial branch, and so I can also sharpen my answers by debating it amongst my teammates, getting feedback on testimonies and Q&As from as many people as you can. That's your teammates, that's your teachers, that's other units, that's CACE, that's us. We're happy to talk about Q&A structures, asking for help. One thing that I always like to talk about is it's good teams can identify problems. Like, this is a problem. The question is, how would you fix it? What is the solution? And great teams can identify solutions. My favorite testimonies and Q&As are when I ask about, isn't this a problem? And the team will say, yes, it is, and here's how I would fix it. Or, no, it isn't, but if it is, here's how I would fix it. Those are really excellent answers. Practice arguing the other side. Even if I'm a judicial branch person, I'm going to practice arguing the executive branch or the legislative branch, just so that I can learn what the stronger arguments are and what the weaker arguments are. Working with other units in the class, as they've said, and yeah. Question back there. Sorry. I meant to call on you earlier.
So I feel like leader people has a lot of leadership-driven people. So how do you kind of balance a lot of people trying to be powerful in a group at once?
So a bunch of type A personalities all get into a room. I call that law school. Yeah, it's really, it's tough, right? I don't know what the answer to that really is. You got to sort of figure it out. I don't know, how'd you guys balance it?
I feel like you'd be surprised, not everyone is as aggressive as you think they might be, and it's like there will always be disagreement, so you just have to accept that. You make sure you trust your unit mates, you make sure you're you like them as you don't have to be best friends, but you kind of have to have trust at least, and kind of know them a little bit outside of we the people. But I didn't really feel like there was too much of I want power and he wants power. It's actually more some people are no, I don't want to be here, and you're no, you gotta go do it, So I think it's not too much of, I don't think there's 5 people wanting to lead the group. I never felt like that was too much of an issue, but if that does become an issue, I always feel like communication will help resolve that.
I actually feel like I became a lot more aggressive when I got into We the People. That sounds kind of weird, but before I feel like I was a lot more just oh, I'll go with whatever everyone else wants, just move nice and stuff. But then I was no, I don't like what you're saying, and so I'm gonna push back. And I know that may sound intimidating at first, you're oh my god, everyone's gonna be yelling and stuff. No, but you just have to find your place, and if you really want to do let's say one of you're arguing with one of your unit mates, if you really want something that, or you need to just figure it out. If you really want something, you just have to go for it. You have to get it.
I think the last point on this sheet is also important, the non-we the people time. Because I can tell you, as a judge, we can tell when a unit doesn't like each other. And and that could be a problem in terms of responsiveness and cohesion, and it can I've seen units where somebody rolls their eyes because somebody that says something they don't like. So I think the more time you spend with each other, like you said, nobody has to be best friends. And frankly, you don't even have to really get along all that well when you're not up there. But when you're up there, you have to figure out how to make it work. And again, I think that's practice. But I think that's also just getting to know the people that you're in your units with. We've definitely coached and helped units that had major personality problems. But eventually, when they got up there, you wouldn't know. Because they just got through it. And then as soon as it was over and they walked out of there, and they were what did you do? That's fine, but it's a matter of just when you're performing and kind of getting used to that and just figuring out through practice how to make that work and how to hold into eye rolls or whatever frustrating thing. I'm very expressive, and so that would be very difficult for me, but So yeah, I think just getting to know your unit mates. You're going to be stuck with them, as it says, for like a lot of time. So just, be cordial and figure it out, basically.
Okay, we'll do one more question.
So earlier alumni was talking about how like she was very for like state rights and that particular question, and her group mates were against it. I was wondering, like, when it comes to that, are you supposed to be like well versed and proficient in the evidence that she's using when it comes to the Q&A, or are you supposed to like not know it so that when it comes time for those questions, you're kind of like it's on the spot?
So the question is are you supposed to know the evidence that other people are using for the other side of an argument?
Yeah.
Yes. As well as the one that you're going to use for your own argument? I think the answer is yes. I mean, anytime you're making an argument, lawyers, what we do, right? And sorry, I'm talking a lot about this because it's very similar, right? What we do is, in order to make an argument, first thing that you have to do is learn the best evidence on the other side. You have to. Because then when you're constructing your argument, you'll know where the weak spots are. And you'll know at the end of the day, after you've constructed it, whether your argument is worth anything or not, right? I can't tell you how many times I've started to write a brief or started to make an argument where I've been like, I absolutely think that this is the right answer. And then as I start to write it, I realize, oh, the other side has the better argument, the stronger argument. So yes, the answer is you should know the best evidence on both sides of every argument that you're making, ideally. I mean, you're not going to know everything. There is a limit to the amount of information that you're going to have. But the best evidence on each side, because that's the only way you can say, okay, I understand that evidence, but here's why it doesn't work. Here's why I'm not convinced. Here's why you shouldn't be convinced either. And that's a really important thing. Like, people are going to look at the same evidence in two different ways all the time, and that's okay. People can look at what Congress is doing, what the president is doing, what the Supreme Court is doing, and say that's good or bad or indifferent all the time, but agree on what is actually happening, and that's fine.
It's sometimes not even about like sides. Like, I think in general, like an ideal unit, you all know like generally the same pieces of evidence. Like, I might be better at explaining one and she might be better at explaining another one, but everyone should be kind of sharing the same evidence, because like you don't want to be up there and then have your unit talk about something and you're like what? Like, they just like pulled it out of somewhere. It's like, it may be very relevant, but you never want to like be in a situation where you're surprised at something and be like, oh yeah, I've heard that before, like they're talking about this theory, like I know that I can back it up with this, or that I could disagree with that. So I think that's very important. Another thing about like evidence that was kind of related to what we were saying earlier was sometimes you'll read a piece of evidence and you'll be like, oh, that's great, and then like the next day you're going to try to use it and it's going to get like, you're going to trip up when you're trying to explain it to people, and that's like so make sure like sometimes even when you're just at home, and if you think like if evidence is great, just practice and answer at home to like tie in that evidence, and just like say it to your computer and be like, 25% of people believe this and I think that will help blah 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 blah, and that will help you the next day.
Yeah, I think like the best, when my unit did our best, we like knew exactly what we were saying. Like, I knew like, okay, like Rachel's gonna say this, and then I'm gonna say this, and then Jared's gonna say that. Like, that's how we practice it. Like, this is like, it all like ties together. And also my unit, what we did is we would make like a grid, and we would have like 6 columns, and we would have one column would be for questions, and then we would each have an answer to back it up. So we like knew exactly what we were saying, and that's what we do with all like our hot seat questions. And obviously you are still gonna get questions like out of the blue that you're like, oh, I didn't like study this, but like if you keep like adding questions, you're gonna see how much like you research like ties back together and how much you can use that.
That's a good technique.